When we talk about carbohydrates, you can see we have an example over here, which is glucose or D-glucose. We generally talk about sugars, which is another term for carbohydrates. But breaking up the word carbohydrate, we can say that the first part it contains uh, carbo, which refers to the carbon backbone, and for the second part, it is hydrate, and this refers to that the molecule is having water. The molecule is having water present, and once we see this structure of glucose, we can say that it has a backbone of carbon molecules, and in case of glucose, which is a number of 6, it has got 6 carbon molecules, and it has also got hydrogen and hydroxyl groups attached to most of its carbon. And since these hydrogen and hydroxyl groups they are in the same ratio as that of water molecules, that is why they are said to be hydrated. So carbon backbone, it is hydrated, hence the term carbohydrate. So another term for carbohydrates, like I said, it is also called sugar. So when we refer to any sugar, we are actually referring to carbohydrate. And if we talk about the functions of carbohydrates, the functions, it has basically 2 functions, and out of which the first one it is storage of energy source. It is storage of energy source for the body, and the second, it can also sometimes act as structural component. So structural component. For example, sorry. For example, like we have cellulose, which is present in the cell wall of plants. So hence it is acting as a structural component, giving the structural integrity of the plant cell. And storage, we can say glycogen, which is present as a carbohydrate storage, which can liberate energy once it is catabolized, and also starch in case of plants. So these are the basic 2 functions of carbohydrate that it has. Now, we can categorize carbohydrates into 4 main types, depending on the number of sugar units that it has. So when the carbohydrate is having 1 sugar unit, so now we are talking about the categories of carbohydrates. So when it is having 1 sugar unit, we call it a monosaccharide. So this mono, it is referring to the one sugar unit, and saccharide, this part refers to the sugar. So saccharide is also another term for the sugar. When it is having two sugar units, it is called a disaccharide. When it is having near about 20 sugar units, or maybe a little bit less, 20 sugar units, it is called oligosaccharide. Oligosaccharides. And when it is more than that, it is called, let's say, many or more than 20. More than 20, it is called polysaccharide. So when we speak about the examples, this oligosaccharide specifically, this does not have any proper examples, because many disaccharides can make up a oligosaccharide, and we can take the example of the rest of them. So monosaccharides, this can have an example, the one which we have here, glucose. This is a monosaccharide because glucose is one unit. Talking about disaccharide, we can have sucrose. Because sucrose is a combination of a glucose molecule and a fructose molecule. And polysaccharides, the ones that we talked about right now, glycogen, starch, cellulose, these are all polysaccharides. So now we have what is a carbohydrate, what are the basic functions of carbohydrates, and what the categories of carbohydrates. Now let's talk a little bit about the structure of carbohydrates. So talking about the structure of carbohydrates, let's take into account monosaccharide. Let's take into account the most abundant monosaccharide, or the most abundant sugar rather, which is present, that is glucose. Let's draw the structure of glucose. And there we have the structure of glucose. Now, let's look into the various components. First, here we have an aldehyde group. We have the carbonyl group along with the hydrogen. So this is an aldehyde. And since this glucose molecule, it is having an aldehyde, it can also be referred to as an aldose due to the presence of the aldehyde. Now, if you look into the next 4 carbons, okay, so let's first number the carbons. If we number the carbon, So this would be carbon number 1, this would be carbon number 2, this is 3, this is 4, 5, 6. So if we look into the carbons 2, 3, 4 and 5. So these carbons are having different groups attached to its 4 valencies. For example, let's look into this one, that is carbon number 2. It has a hydroxyl group attached, then it has got a hydrogen, it has got the aldehyde, and the final one, it has got this whole other part which is present. So when a carbon is having 4 different groups attached to its 4 valencies, it can be said that these carbon molecules are chiral carbon molecules, and this is the case for carbon number 3, 4 and 5 as well. If you see, let's say for carbon number 4, it has got again this OH group, then the hydrogen, then we can consider this group as an whole, where the whole upper part is present, and finally the lower part with the other 2 carbons. So it has also got 4 different groups. This would be the case for 3 and 5 as well. So these carbons are said to be chiral carbons. Chiral carbons. So whenever a carbon atom is having 4 different groups attached to its 4 valencies, then it is said to be a chiral molecule. And this chirality, it actually gives rise to a lot of properties. It can, have different kinds of stereoisomers. It can have a lot of other properties, and the most important property that is related to these carbohydrates, that is the configurational change, that is the D and L configurations. The D and L configurations. So when the chiral carbon that is farthest from the aldehyde, or the first functional group that is present, the chiral carbon that is farthest from that, the configuration of this carbon determines whether the molecule is in D configuration or it is in L configuration. Let's draw in the molecule once more. So numbering the carbon. This is 1, this is 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So the chiral carbon that is farthest from this aldehyde group, if the OH of that carbon that is farthest from the aldehyde group, it is towards the right side, then if let's write it down. If OH is in right side, then the molecule is said to have a D configuration. But if the OH is in left side, then the molecule is having an L configuration. And the thing is that it has to be the chiral carbon that is farthest from the aldehyde group. For the sugar molecules that is having an aldehyde group. So why did not we take the 6th carbon? Because the 6th carbon, if we write it down like this, it has got 2 hydrogen atoms, which makes it having same molecule attached to 2 of its valencies, and that is why this molecule is not chiral. Hence, the farthest chiral carbon would be this. This is the farthest chiral carbon. I hope that's clear. Now, we can also have sugars having a ketone group instead of an aldehyde group. Let's take an example. Let's take the example of fructose. So, fructose is a molecule that is having a ketone group instead of an aldehyde group. And it is also having 6 carbon molecule backbone, but the difference with glucose is that it is having this carbon where the ketone functional group is present. So this is a ketone group, and since this is having a ketone group, we cannot call it an aldose. We call it a ketose molecule. We call it a ketose molecule. Therefore, sugars can be 1, it can be an aldose, or 2, it can be a ketose. And again, if we want to figure out the D and L configuration, we can calculate the farthest chiral carbon from the ketone group this time, because this is the functional group. The ketone functional group, the farthest carbon, then we can check the orientation of the OH, that is the hydroxyl group, and the hydrogen, and we can determine whether it is in D or in L. For this case, it would be, since this is the ketone, we can go with 1. This is carbon number 3, that is, this is carbon number 3, this is 1 and this was 2, this is 3, 4 and 5. So carbon number 5 is again having the OH group towards the right, and hence this is D-fructose, whereas this was the glucose. So now we have the categories of sugars, that is monosaccharide, disaccharide, oligosaccharide, and polysaccharide. And next we know that sugars can be of two types. It can be a molecule that is containing an aldehyde group, which is called aldose, for example glucose, and it can also contain a ketone group, which is called ketose, and the example is fructose.